What's up, y'all? I'm back at it once again, Iskosi Umfundisi, and I'm gonna hit you with some news that many people don't know about the struggle, because black people is worldwide, so they don't really don't know about the struggle and the stuff that we go through. And here's a place that's not really known, that really should be known, Australia. You know, and it talks about our famous queen sister over there, Bonita Mabo, a prominent indigenous rights activist, dies days after receiving accolade. Now, I know Bonita Ms. Mabo is not known over in the Western Hemisphere, so this kind of her first introduction, even though she passed away. So we're going to give her, this queen, much honor and much respect, and this ancestor much honor and much respect, and we're going to listen to her story. Bonita Mabo, prominent indigenous rights activist, dies days after receiving accolade. This year, prominent Indigenous and South Sea Islander activist Bonita Mabo has died. Mabo was the wife of Eddie Mabo and worked alongside him in pursuing the indigenous land rights. Just days after she was awarded an honorary doctorate of letters from James Cook University for her contribution to social justice and human rights. It is a big loss for all of us, Indigenous WA Senator Patrick Dodson said. I think Australia needs to honor people like Mrs. Mabo, who stood to some degree in the shadows of her husband, but who was the backbone and the steel that he helped, and many others continue the struggles. A person of great note, a great Australian, and a great contribution to all causes of justice to all. It is a sad day, and it is a big loss for all of us, but she is a person who comes in vain of the very recent recognition that it's because of her we can do things. In a statement, the Australian South Sea Islander Alliance said she would be greatly missed. Auntie Bonita's contributions to the social and human rights of the First Nation peoples and Australian South Sea Islander recognition was monumental and relentless, the statement read. A formidable woman, Tanya, Auntie Bonita will be greatly missed, as Australia has lost one of her greatest matriarchs of all time. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner June Oscar remember her as the mother of native title. She was a woman of great strength. She was gentle, stoic, and loving, Mrs. Oscar said in a statement. I will always remember her as the mother of a native title. Her legacy lives on in our continued fight for land and sea rights. Indigenous education was a lifelong passion. Mabo was a Marabara woman and a descendant of the Vanuatu workers brought to Queensland to work on the sugar plantations. She was born near Ingham in the northern Queensland and married Eddie in 1959. The couple had 10 children, and Indigenous education became one of Mabo's lifelong passions. In the early 1970s, she set up Australia's first Aboriginal community school and worked as a teacher aide. For black children, we can see how they were. They were used to going to school and being blamed for different things, she said in a 2013 interview. I used to go up to the school and used to have arguments with the teachers, and many times they cried, and I didn't care because I did what I wanted to say. The black community school started in Townsendville with 10 students and 2 teachers who volunteered for half pay. The school taught children how to read and write, and Torres Strait Islander history and culture. At its peak in the late 70s, 45 school students were enrolled in the school. It was closed in 1985 due to lack of funding. The Mabo decision. Eddie Mabo spent a decade fighting for official recognition of his people's ownership of the Murray Island in the Torres Straits. Her husband did not live to see the results, but in 1992, Bonita Mabo was making her way from North Queensland Islands to Canterbury when the landmark decision was handed down. In 2017, she recalled that moment. We were just outside of Sydney and stopped and pulled up on us on the side of the road, and my leader rang and said, "Dad won the decision, won the case," she said. And we jumped out and we hugged each other. We were such proud of the punch. We were proud as punch. The Mabo legal case was legally significant in Australia because it ruled that the lands of this continent were not terrorist nullists or land belonging to no one when the European settlement occurred. It also found the Marian people, traditional owners of Murray Islands, including the islands of Murray, Doctor, and Waver, were entitled against the whole world to possession of the lands. The case paved the way for the Native Title Act of 1993. In her interview with ABC in 2013, Mabo said she had to be there all the way for her husband all the way. Thick or thin, we made it, she said. I was disappointed he wasn't there, for the judgment had come down earthly enough. But on his deathbed, he kept saying, when I win the case, when I win the case. Recognizing South Sea Islanders. In recent years, Mabo had been fighting for the South Sea Islanders to be recognized in Australia as their own distinct ethnic group. She was recognized in the Order of Australia in 2013 for distinguished service to the Indigenous community and human rights. I feel so honored to be part of it, Mabo said at the time. Mabo said she often asked about working with Eddie, but while speaking about the Order of Australia, she said she made sure to tell a lot of people, well, I got another side to tell too. I am a South Sea Islander descent. My great-grandfather came from the Tenant Islands and was stolen here to come and clean the country up here, she said. And well, then when I started saying that, they'd sit up and listen. Jackie Huggins, the co-chair of National Congress of Australia's First People, said Mabo was a mother to all of us in the political struggle. She had left a legacy of great compassion of being a woman who stand behind Eddie Mabo, her husband, in his fight for justice and human rights, she said. She was also an activist in her own right. She was a great legend across this whole nation. Like her husband, her legacy will live on. So as we see, she started schools, and fought for our people to get the land back from our stuff. One part she talked about was the blackbird, what they call blackbirding, how the white folks around the Pacific Islands, they started snatching up black people from different islands and having them work on sugar farms. We're going to talk about that. We're going to go a little bit more deeper than that because that deserves a lot more to be spoke on. All right, here we go. Bantu, what this article is called, South Sea Islanders mark sugar slave days. They got slaves in their little quotation because, Australia is still a very, very, very racist place. Bantu is calling for an apology over practice known as blackbirding when the Pacific Islanders were used as labor in Queensland. Claims of the Queensland government stealing South Sea Islanders' wages and call for apologies are being made on the 150th anniversary of the first laborers arriving in Queensland. Descendants of the tens of thousands of workers make a notorious episode in Australian history with events across Queensland. The process known as blackbirding saw islanders sometimes forcibly taken to work in the agricultural industry and what they often describe as the slave trade. This is a little-known story of exploited foreign workers told by Auntie Joyce Lee. I am a proud South Sea woman. My dad was blackbirded from Tania Islands in New Herbicide, Bantu. Put to work in the cane fields in Burnenberg as a slave labor. There was no money. They worked for their food. And to think about this quite often, how hard it must have been for them, said Leah. He told us the story of how he was lured on boats with fake jewelry. They took the jewelry into the islands and showed the kind of people on the islands that if they were wanting more, all they had to do was come out to the boats. This is the story my dad used to tell us. And when they got to their quota or amount of people they wanted on the boat, they would just pull up anchor and then sail. And he was put to work in the cane fields of Bannonburg. They came from 80 Pacific Islands, mainly Bantu and Solomon. The 40-year-long indentured labor program was the backbone of Queensland Island's colonial-era sugar industry. Professor Clive Moore of the University of Queensland is a leading historian on the Pacific. I don't think there was any immigrant group, they still call them immigrant groups, with a smack in the face, in Australia who was worse treated than the Australian South Sea Islanders. If you think about it, right through the process, there are at least one person who at least was partially kidnapped and brought here illegally. That is an Australian South Sea Islander, said Professor Moore. The death rate was higher than any immigrant group to ever come to Australia in our East Scandal. And they're not only immigrant groups that ever had an act of parliament passed by federal government to totally deport them. You put those things together and it explains a lot of the problems we have a century later in the South Sea Islands community, he added. In August 1863, the first of 5,000 men, women, and children arrived on a ship Don Juan on Moreton Bay off of Biscayne. Many of them were kidnapped from islands known as blackbirding, and often in conditions that have been described as slavery. Professor Clive Moore disagrees. The straight up answer to that is no. They were not slaves. It's a matter of definition. A slave is someone who can be owned, brought, and sold and earns no wages. They were not owned because they came on a 3-year contract, she said. They were paid for their work, and the third piece of evidence is they came back to Australia and went back to the islands and then came back again. It is an emotional word used by the islands today about the process and feelings about the process, but strictly speaking, it is not applicable word, he said. Comes from the white man. About 1,500, almost a third, died away from their island homes. Imelda Miller is a Queens Island Museum assistant curator for the Aboriginal, Torres Strait, and Pacific Studies. Her ancestors came from Vanuatu. It's one of Australia and Queensland's most hidden histories. It is not taught in our school and is not well known in history. It is not shared among the wide community. So it's really important that we educate the wider community about who we are, she said. Those that survived were deported in the early 1900s under white Australia policy, but 2,000 remain. Their descendants number more than 30,000, including rugby league star Ma Malinga. Another is Bonita Mabo, the wife of land activist Iskosi Mabo. The South Sea Islanders are starting to get recognition, which is a long time due to us. But there's still a long way to go, and people are getting more to know about the Australian South Sea Islanders and are here to stay, said Mrs. Mabo. Mrs. Mabo's grandfather came from Vanuatu, and she has just returned for the first time. It took 6 generations to Tano, and I am so happy about that. Because if I die tomorrow, I can die a happy woman. I put my foot on a Tino island, she said. Across the Pacific, the episode is not forgotten. Vanuatu Land and Mine Ministry, Ralph from Vanva, is from Brisbane for the 50th anniversary. It is an issue that had a big impact on our country and a big part of our national identity. And we just had a national commemoration of the 150th anniversary. So it's an issue where people felt connected because everyone had been impacted in their family, said Minister Renner Vavu. There is a feeling for a need to get those family connections and find those people. There's a lot of big people in the language we use, but the national language was developed in the sugar canes of Queensland. The government of Vanuatu wants an apology. The Prime Minister of Vanuatu made a speech and said in many aspects it was shameful and there needs to be an apology from those responsible. And I think the apology is seen as something in Melanesian culture. To say sorry is a way to reconcile the past, Minister Ranavuvo said. Just recently uncovered by Professor Clive Moore, the wages paid to the islanders were taken by Queensland government in 1885 and never paid out. He said they've been worth tens of millions of dollars a day. The island's wages were misappropriated on top of everything else and used illegally, I believe, by the Queensland government. To rub a little bit more salt in the wound, it was transferred to the Continental Welsh government to pay for deportation in 1907 and 1908, said Moore. There are many more tragic stories about these South Sea Islanders. Amaruza Miller from the Queensland Museum says that 150th anniversary is just not dwelling on the past, but also preparing the community for the future. I think it's really important to this year remember how far we come as a cultural group. As part of the problem, we are not talking about our history, said Mrs. Miller. I think it's a painful past, and some painful stories have been involved with this story. But this year, we're talking about encouraging people to talk about it and share stories so that its hidden history could not continue to the wider community, but also within our own community. Now, as you've seen in the story, the white man, Dr. Professor Clive Moore, tried to say, no, that wasn't slavery. No, the niggas done got it wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. But then again, they, as you said before, the list he went through slavery. Let's go find it right quick. Because this got to be, got to be talked about. Because this is how white folks is in the state too. When it comes down to our history over here and stuff like that. A slave is someone who can be brought, sold, and earns no wages. They were not owned because they had a 3-year contract, she said. They were paid for their work. And the third piece of evidence, they came back to Australia and went back to the islands and came back again. But as you look down here a little bit from the same doctor, and this is propaganda, you know what I'm saying? From the same doctor. Let's see what he says. And just recently recovered by Professor Clive Moore, the wages paid to the islanders were taken by the Queensland government from 1885 and never paid out. So that's one. They never got paid out. You know what I'm saying? The islanders' wages was misappropriated, and on top of everything, else and used illegally, I believe, by the Queensland government to send them back to where they came from. So yes, that was slavery. You know what I'm saying? You working for food, you know what I'm saying, and stuff like that, and you getting your ass beat. Yes, that's slavery. I'm sorry. I know I'm not sorry. That's just what it is. But this is how white folks choose to cover their little dirty tricks and their dirty lies. Anyway, much love to Bonita Mabo, the wonderful queen, our queen, Indigenous queen, sister over there in the Pacific. Got much love for our people over there in the Pacific. You know they thing. You know what I'm saying? And shout out to this history, bringing it forth to the world. Hey, subscribe to the channel and much love.